is Anne Widdecome. Anne Widdecome, who was in a few... Oh, God. I mean, she's not as... She's still obviously a conservative, but she's not as active anymore. She used to be the MP for Maidstone, which is just down the road from me. And she's just this horrible, screeching woman. Just got this... Yeah, and she made this comment, and she's basically said that she thinks that she would rather be... It's easier to be a Nazi or a communist in the modern-day Britain than it is to be a Christian. Yes, we're about to have some uber persecution complex coming up here. Anne Widdecome has claimed it is easier to be a Nazi or a communist in post-war Britain. You'd think in post-war Britain, that's the least... that's the last place that it would be easier to be a Nazi or a communist. With all this talk, and by the way, that's what cultural Marxist actually means when people say it. When you hear these people talk about cultural Marxist, it's not really a thing, right? Cultural Marxist is just red baiting. It's McCarthyism for the 21st century. Understand that, right? It's just a way, because people don't want to say communist, or they don't want to say that because it makes you sound, well, you sound like Glenn Beck, right? Whereas if you say cultural Marxist, it sounds a lot better. But Anne Widdecome has claimed it's easier to be a Nazi or a communist in post-war Britain than being a Christian today because quite militant secularism discourages people from expressing their faith. This is in a Britain where, it is effectively, this is a Britain where, what Britain is this she lives in? And discouraging their faith. That's not a consequence of militant secularism. There's no such thing as militant secularism. Right? Secularism is people who think, right, this is a stupid, and atheists make this mistake too. Secularism is not atheism. Secularism is you believe what you want, but don't force your beliefs on other people. You practice your beliefs how you do. We all have the equal opportunity. You can be a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or an atheist or whatever you want. You can be a Scientologist or some other weird shit, be a snake handler, any of these things. You can be them if you want, right? But you be them, don't assume everyone else should have to. But apparently they're being discouraged from expressing their faith. That's not a consequence of militant secularism. That's a case of you being a coward, right? And you're embarrassed, right? Yeah, you are deep down, if that's your problem, it's because you know you're wrong about something. She claimed that respect for others' personal views meant people could have been a fascist in post-1945 Britain or a communist during the Cold War, but Christians now had started suppressing the expression of conscience. Right? Well, that's your fucking problem then, Anne. Right? If you're too much of a coward to express yourself, right, that's their problem. That's not anyone else's, right? Just because people have started saying things like this, and I agree. There are atheists out there who one of the reasons I don't go on about atheism anymore is because I don't like, I don't really, I will say I'm an atheist, but I don't go on about it because it's boring. And I find people like Richard Dawkins, and I find people like Sam Harris. Okay, Sam Harris isn't British, but I find people like Sam Harris and a lot of these other people, and that prick David Silverman from the American Atheists. I find them to be intolerant, overbearing, smug, condescending, pompous, overprivileged arseholes. And yes, I've said the word privileged. They are. These guys. I don't believe Richard Dawkins knows the struggle of the common man, right? It's hard to believe it's hard to believe oppression, of a guy like Dawkins when you look at the life he's had, the success he's had, the popularity he has, and where there's no oppression there, and the same with a lot of these people. They seem to think this is what annoys me when atheists compare their struggle to things like homosexuals. Or black people in the civil rights area. It's not the same. It's not the same. You're just trying to make yourself into a victim. I'm sorry, you just are. But that doesn't mean that on the other side of it, that doesn't mean that, you know, Christians, you still have got the outnumbered. It's not our fault. If your religion is losing ground, that's your problem. And you have to work out why. And it's not because... And why do you need to... You know, you have the right to express it. But why do you care whether you can express... You know, if you believe this shit is true, look at it this way. If you believe this stuff is true, Anne, right, you get to go to heaven forever, right? And I get to be bent over for an eternity with a red-hot poker up my bum. If I believed that was true, do you know what? I wouldn't care if people were being obnoxious towards me. If I believed that was true. She goes on to say, I think it's a very difficult country now. Yes, it's horrible, isn't it? Yeah. Why don't you go to some Middle Eastern Islamic theocracy and go and worry about... Go talk to the Christians in Egypt and see about how they're doing. Anne, you poor woman. Unlike when I was growing up, in which to be a Christian, an active Christian at any rate... Yes, it was different. Things were different when you were younger. When will old people get this into their fucking head? Yes, when you were younger it was different. Right? It's always going to be the case. When you were younger, things were different. Times change. If you want to believe this, I have no problem, could give less of a shit. It's your life. You do with it what you want. If it gets you through the day, I couldn't give a monkey's. No. She said Christians also faced a sort of atheism that wouldn't have been said. So what she's complaining about is that atheists are now getting a bit more lippy. You know, well, yeah, that's going to happen, Anne. You're going to get people who are a bit more lippy, but... You know, we've had to sit, you know, atheists have had to sit here and listen to people like you prattle on for centuries now. We've had decades and decades and years of people like you. And the consequence of that is going to be them ending up doing it back. I'm not saying it's right. I don't care, right? You know, I think, you know, I personally don't like it when atheists go about acting just like religious idiots like this. Because it's like, what's the point in sitting there claiming you're better when you're going to act the same? And the problem is nowadays with all this stuff. But the funny thing is, this is Anne Widdecome, a conservative, who is saying this, even though David Cameron himself in April said that his big society was doing Jesus' work. And even though that David Cameron came out and he said that he recently came out just yesterday and said that Christianity makes you a better person. Right? Politicians should be more Christian because it makes them better people. So don't sit there and tell me that there's a problem here with expressing yourself. The Prime Minister's doing it. The real problem is that nowadays the people who've been in charge, the big white, powerful, rich Christian, males, and that, now we're getting to an age where there's more tolerance coming in, and a lot of these people who are moaning that, oh, white people are oppressed, oh, it's heterosexual people who are oppressed, oh, it's men who are being oppressed, oh, it's the rich who are being picked on, oh, it's the Christians who are being picked on. You're just scared because you're worried that in a fair society or in another society, that when society changes, you will be treated as badly as you have treated others.